It may be Ontario's greenest town, but what's it going to do about its local brownfield?
This will bring us into the 21st century in terms of our recreational facilities.
They're building this on the basis of hope, a political field of dreams. That's my worry.
When it comes to urban renewal and containing sprawl, many Ontario communities see redeveloping brownfields as part of the solution. Brownfields are former industrial or military sites contaminated with lingering chemical hazards. Tighter environmental protection regulations have made the rules clearer for developers and municipalities, but it's far from smooth sailing. The city of Orillia, for example, is running into strong local opposition to its plans for a highly contaminated former foundry site. Tonight, cleanup or cover up? A special report on the Brownfields battle in Orillia.
The word I use to describe this area is moribund, if not dead. It tends to be little industrial, commercial, and a few generally poorer class homes. The city keeps talking about revitalizing this area. And then next thing we know, we are the rather stupid owners of a heavily contaminated site.
It is critical for cities to take a leadership role in that there is so much land within city boundaries, for example, that will go totally dormant if nothing happens.
This site was a foundry which grew and grew, became a very sprawling building, and they used to go and dump the foundry sand and other wastes anywhere on the wetlands here.
The site itself has contaminants on it. I can't tell you exactly how contaminated it is. What we are hoping to achieve is to regenerate the property through normal cleanup process and put a brand new multi-use recreation facility that is valued at more than $42 million. The idea is that this will bring us into the 21st century in terms of our recreational facilities. It will have an aquatic center in it, which will have a 25-meter 8-lane pool, plus a therapy pool, plus a smaller pool. There's a wonderful slide for the kids to use. We also have a gymnasium in here, plus we have 2 ice arenas. One will be NHL-size ice, the other one will be Olympic-size ice. And we also have on the site itself a children's play area, which will allow squirt pad. We'll have 8 tennis courts, plus there'll be 4 baseball diamonds here with bleacher seating for over 500.
They're building this on the basis of hope, a political field of dreams. That's my worry.
We are going to meet the Ministry of the Environment standards on all cleanups. The engineering firm that we have now working for us, Shaheen and Peaker, they are advising us as to what we need to do next to meet that standard.
The reason for this media briefing is to address some of the concerns that have been expressed about particularly the environmental aspects of our multi-use recreation facility project.
How many chemicals have been discovered on the site that pose a threat to human health?
We found a number of heavy metals, lead, chromium, zinc. We found a number of chemicals that are, I guess we'd call them coal tar derived, benzoate, pyrene, anthracene, phenanthrene. We found some semi-volatile organic compounds, one of them being bis-2-ethylhexylphthalate. We found some chlorinated organic compounds, trichloroethylene, vinyl chloride, cis-1,2-dichloroethylene. We have found PCBs at low concentrations. I think that's about it.
You're aware that there were 45-gallon drums of trichloroethylene that were buried and are buried, and also that there are barrels of cyanide that have been buried. I've been told firsthand that, that from people who actually disposed of this trichloroethylene at the back of the site.
In all studies of this type, things that are between the boreholes are unknown. That's a fact of life. But we've covered virtually all of the site with a borehole or a test pit. We've studied soil and groundwater. We believe we have enough information now to proceed with the risk assessment and the risk management measures that are needed.
Ms. Robbins herself said, is there stuff between the test holes? Well, of course, but that's part of life. No, I say that's part of death. Because if we don't know what's there, and you're going to send little children, I get emotional with that. How can you do it? Test, it's a hole. How much does it cost?
You can't find everything every time because these things, a borehole is only about this big. So what we're proposing as the soil is being excavated is provision for if we find something unusual or something that doesn't look like the material that we've tested to go to the landfill, that we do segregate it and test it.
Have you found any indication of asbestos in any of your samples?
Asbestos is a designated substance under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and before you demolish a building, you have to do a designated substance survey. Well, there are no buildings on site. So, as such, there are no asbestos-containing materials that we have to test for. That said, we have put measures in place to prevent particulates from becoming airborne. I don't think we would be testing for asbestos. There's no reason to.
2,500 pounds of this material was used on each furnace every 30 to 45 days over a 15-year period. As it wore down, they sent a man inside and he would chip it away with a chisel and a hammer. Most of the time it broke off back into powder again, and then it was disposed at the back of the site. There's over 600,000 pounds of this stuff that has been dumped there.
If there is that material that has been deposited out there, we have put in place health and safety plans to prevent soil particles from becoming airborne.
They want to send children there. Can't do it. No way.
Why did we not interview residents of the city of Orillia? This question only recently came up, and the people who are asking it, they weren't very friendly. And I was a little bit afraid of some of the outbursts.
The consultants for the city haven't done, they admit, a historical study of just what was done there. So they don't know, and we don't know, all that's there, and yet they're proceeding. The city wants to cut down everything, fill in the swamp, and it makes no sense.
Well, this wetland, it's only half a hectare and it's right on the edge of the site. This area will be parking for the football fields. This was once a provincially significant wetland. Now it's not provincially significant, but locally significant. Locally significant in the filtering of impurities that might enter the lake. The lake is only half a kilometer to our south from here. So I strongly support this site as a recreational site, but I just wish we could have kept the wetland values. Almost 3 dozen turtles would be buried alive when they start filling in this wetland, which they plan to do almost immediately.
It's a swamp. It's not a significant wetland as has been attributed to. The unfortunate here is that it would not be there if the property beside the MRF site had not blocked off the outflow from there. And it's unfortunate, but we cannot work around it. We have to work as if it's not there. I've been hearing now for a few weeks that the idea of going in and doing some attempt to save some turtles, whatever the case may be, but nothing has taken place.
These groups did hold out some hope that the excavation on that property would be put off and that they might be able to work on this in the spring, which would, I believe, would be the better time.
Any discussion on that? I'm going to move on.
The release of toxins comes with the digging, There's more release that comes with transporting it and dumping it in the landfill. And the third jeopardy, if you will, is the groundwater into the sanitary storm sewers. The chemicals will not be treated, they will not be extracted because the plant's not equipped to do so.
Microorganisms in the sewage treatment plant can handle a wide variety of bacteria and a wide variety of biodegradable materials, including chemicals.
They're going to be removing earth from the footprint of the building itself, and it's going to be taken to our landfill site and where it will be safely stored.
$40,000 tons of contaminated soil does not belong at the shore of Lake Simcoe, which is a lake that provides drinking water to 5 municipalities.
In 1991, there was a hearing on this landfill, and there were 6 times the levels of mercury found above the Canadian Water Quality Guidelines in the leachate. The Environmental Assessment Board was wondering why this landfill wasn't being shut down. And we got some very stringent conditions of approval for the operation of this landfill. Everything coming into this landfill had to be sorted, everything. That means no recyclables could be put in this landfill, no reusables, no compostables, and especially no toxic substances were to be put into this landfill. This landfill is surrounded on 3 sides by water. The certificate of approval was set up to protect the water bodies around this landfill. And that certificate of approval, in my opinion, is still not being implemented by the City of Orillia.
Our landfill site is licensed to take contaminated soil. It is not licensed to take hazardous or toxic waste, and that will not be going to the site.
The data that's been provided shows that the material proposed to go to the landfill site is solid, non-hazardous waste.
But is it toxic?
Not by definition under the Environmental Protection Act.
I believe that somebody's playing games with ministry guidelines, because you can't say that vinyl chloride is non-hazardous. You can't say that lead is all right to be put in here. You cannot say that those chemicals should be put in this landfill.
If we don't take it to our own site, which is licensed to handle this, then it has to go to another site, which will cost us considerably more money to do that because of the trucking costs.
There are monitoring wells both around the landfill site and around this particular MRF, the Brownfield site.
Monitoring simply means watching the levels increase. That's all it means, unless you take some action after you see the amount of leachate.
The landfill site's groundwater and surface water is in compliance with the ministry's criteria and the certificate of approval for the site.
Most people depend on the Ministry of Environment to protect our environment and the best interests of the public. And I think people are starting to lose faith in our ministry. And that's why the citizens are taking action.
Can this soil hurt someone? Because if it can, then it's toxic, and the license does not allow it.
It meets the criteria to be accepted to the Kitchener Street landfill site.
Toxicity really relates to impact on individual living things. So if we have the stuff encapsulated at landfill site, you could say it's not toxic.
0.5.
Yes, 0.5
is the MOE standard.
Industrial sites for
this is going to be a playground.
Swamp that's going to be filled in. That's the swamp that has the turtles and the frogs, and that's the one that's going to be filled in.
The City of Orillia Public Forum, and the city would like to bring forward the facts on the project.
We have public information that needs to be shared.
You're welcome to attend. We have displays, we have information on the contaminants and all the issues on the site. We have our experts here, but you are not welcome to take over the room and place...
We're not taking over the room. The city is doing a cover-up, not a cleanup.
Stand, pose any questions you wish with regards to this information, but they just wanted to remove this right now.
What's disturbing is that this city is holding a public meeting after they've already carried out the dirty deeds. Where they've dumped contaminated soil at the landfill before they have the appropriate information. It's a flawed process.
What are the people putting out this information afraid of? That they cannot face a conflicting view. Is this democracy? Is this a citizens forum? Or is it a con job?
Brownfield is brownfield. You put rust there, something's gonna, come out of it sooner or later. They're not saying that they are gonna get everything, and they're not saying that they will get everything. It's sort of like a 50-50 chance. And that's how I see this park being contaminated. It's a 50-50. Are you gonna get something out of that field? Who knows? Should I let my kid play on that field? Less likely, because I know what's there.
There are toxins in the Murphland that drain into our waters. By digging and disturbing, we threaten our life. It's really important to make your voice heard.
As part of the risk assessment, we'll be developing a risk management plan, and that is to put engineering controls and monitoring in place so that the public and the natural environment are protected. The types of controls that are applicable for this site include capping the site. Now, people may say that this is just covering up what is there, and in fact it is covering up what is there, but it is putting a physical barrier between you and what is on the site. There are also other types of engineering controls, gas venting systems and so on, to ensure that the vapors don't come in contact with people. Other types of things are going to include long-term monitoring of the soil and groundwater, and ongoing inspections of the capping system, ongoing inspections of the venting systems. The cost of risk management and monitoring is greater than zero. But when you consider the cost of total remediation of the site to generic criteria, the cost would be in the many tens of millions of dollars.
We're stuck with this land, no problem. Let's clean it up then. If they want to put the MRF on there, find the barrels of toxins, get rid of the asbestos, clean it up. You're looking at a $50 million bill for a $1 piece of land. Let's do it. And I'll be the first one to go there with shovel and help them.
We're going in as quickly as we can and rescue these turtles and taking them to another location within the city of Aurelia and releasing them. Otherwise, the turtles will die when they start filling this in. We know there's at least 32 turtles in there. There could be more. This is probably the worst time of the year to rescue turtles. They're down in the mud where they hibernate. Turtle rescue like this hasn't been done before. I think this will be a learning experience for everyone. There could be some there, but I can't quite see through that ice. Or they may have scattered.
I've heard of it being tried up in the Ottawa area recently in a similar situation. They weren't very successful at finding the turtles that they were after. If I recall, they may have found one. If they were easy to find, something would have come along and eaten them.
Here's one. I've been talking to turtle experts for the last 2 weeks constantly, finding out the best way to proceed with this. We got 7 in there.
This is a beautiful looking girl. It's in lovely condition. This is an excellent size. But this turtle, she could be 60 years old.
So it looks like we have about 12 to 15 that we've been able to rescue. Certainly happy now. I think there's potential for more.
This is our common southern Ontario painted turtle. Certainly one of the most beautiful turtles that we have in Ontario. Female. I'm sorry, sweetie. Manicure day.
Hey, Jenny, does that hurt the turtle?
No.
Each turtle will be individually marked with a little nick in the carapace on the edge of the scuttle. And that way we'll know individual turtles so that we'll see if they survive. I think this has been a successful Operation Turtle Rescue.
It's certainly been successful for these turtles.
It's so sad that this healthy wetland is going to be filled in. There is no reason in my mind that it couldn't have been kept. This is several turtles in the summer.
I believe that if you started off with the idea, let us take the land and do an assessment and find out what its best and highest use is. Maybe the only use for this site, the best use, is open recreation, but not a building.
I guess one sort of stops when you say this is going to happen, and then they say I don't believe you, and I'm then stuck. I don't know where to go from there. We are managing the site, we are doing it to the best of our ability, and we are not here to cause adverse effects to the public and the environment. We're here to prevent them.
We are not opposed to redevelopment. We believe it should be done, and probably the only body that will do it will be the city, but it has to be done properly. Let's do an environmental assessment.
No matter what we have attempted to say to them in terms of we will do everything we can to make it a safe site and by whatever means that is financially available to us, nothing's going to do for them. They cannot be satisfied because they're on a mission. That mission is to stop this at all costs.
Let's update the story for you. The legal battles are not over for Orillia. In February, a court will likely hear a notice of motion calling for a full environmental assessment of the Brownfield redevelopment. And the Orillia experience is not unique. As communities across Ontario expand, many face similar issues. Can brownfields really be redeveloped safely? Joining us tonight, Dave Harper. He's a geoscientist with the environmental engineering firm Jakes Whitford. And Gord Perks is here. He's with the Toronto Environmental Alliance. I must tell you, one of the most fascinating things about the last 20 minutes watching that piece was watching the two of you watch that piece. Because there were various moments in that piece where, Gord, you were going like this, and you were going like this at the very same time. It was quite amusing. Start us out, Dave, by just telling us, how common is this experience in our province today?
Certainly, brownfield site development is really gained momentum in the last few years.
How come?
Primarily because of the pressures to develop sites in the cities of Ontario and look at those development opportunities ahead of expansion to greenbelt areas that surround the cities.
Where's the pressure coming from to develop?
A lot from the municipalities themselves. There's the infrastructure is already in place to redevelop these properties, and it makes good sense for the community in most cases to bring these back into productive use.
Meaning the communities themselves are tired of having this land just sit there doing nothing.
Correct.
Bringing in no tax dollars, not providing anything back to the community. As a social goal, as a goal of community good, would you agree with the notion, Gord, of redeveloping brownfields?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Brownfields are actually one of those terrible problems for the environmental movement. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're trying to stop sprawl, and that means, intensifying, filling in the old sites, making use, as was said, of the infrastructure that already exists. You've got a subway line nearby or a streetcar line nearby. That's a great place for development. Tuesday and Thursday, though, we're worried about the contaminated legacy on many of these sites. So it's a terrible problem. And unfortunately here in Ontario, we don't have very good mechanisms for solving that problem.
What do we have for solving the problem?
Well, under Harris, the rules were changed a little bit, and what we have is called a risk management approach to brownfield site development, which means you take a look at it and you figure out, okay, if we do this with the site, human beings will be exposed this much. So if you put housing on it, there'll be a high level of exposure. If we make a parking lot and just pave it over and cover it, well, there won't be that much human exposure. So we wind up with this system whereby the dirty sites either get ignored or swept under the rug or paved over and left under the rug, and only the very pristine, easy to redevelop sites are the ones that are getting attention and getting action on.
So it would appear as if there are still plenty of sites that are sort of beyond the test that Gord has outlined and that are just going to be left fallow for years to come. Is that right?
There are impacted or contaminated sites in Ontario that are very problematic to address from a cost and technical point of view associated with the impacts that are present on the property today.
I don't know how much you know about this Aurelia site, but we heard one of the people in that piece say it would cost $50 million to fix a site that's worth $1. You know the economics of these things. Does it make any sense for any developer to try to build on land given that kind of a bill at the end of the day for cleaning it up?
Well, it depends what the land use is the ultimate land use of the site.
Well, here's one, they want to put a MRF on it, multiple use recreation facility.
Right, and it depends what's best for that community. If a recreational facility is something that Aurelia really needs and it's part of their community planning and improvement process, then that is the right decision for that community. In other locations, it could be industrial commercial land use or residential land use.
Question though, Dave, is knowing what you know about the history of the site, would you let your kids play baseball on that baseball field?
Provided that the right remedial strategies and risk management measures were in place, yes, I would.
And those exist?
Those exist for the majority of brownfield sites today.
You've got your own test. You've got kids. Would you let your kids play on a site like that, for example, if the city promised to clean it up?
I don't know that site in that much well. The city's not promising to clean it up, and this is the trick to it all. In Ontario, we have this great mechanism for evaluating, this use for that site and that use for this site. We have some tools in place about who's going to bear liability if there turns out to be a problem. What we don't have in place is a mechanism to cover that $50 million problem. We don't have a mechanism that says every site ought to be cleaned up to the standard so that it's as good as the neighboring site that was never used for an industrial purpose.
Okay, I think
we don't have that mechanism here in Ontario.
I understand. I think what they're planning though in Aurelia, and I don't just want to talk about Aurelia, we want to talk about the phenomenon, but I think one of the solutions they've found here is obviously to dig a meter deep and take all that dirt and move it somewhere else. The thinking being that will eliminate much of the chemical problem from the area and what will be left behind will be okay. Based on your knowledge of chemistry and science, is that an acceptable solution?
Well, a meter's not that deep, frankly. Some of the worst horror stories we've had in North America with old sites, old contaminated sites, it was stuff that was well below a meter finding its way to the surface. Love Canal. There was stuff buried well under a meter below Love Canal. They wound up having to evacuate the entire community. Sydney tar ponds, there's stuff bubbling up from fairly far down there as well. Experience shows that when something's in the ground, it doesn't just sit there. Water's moving around, gases are bubbling up through it. You can't think of these as places that you can simply put a bubble around and forget about. And that's why we need a strategy for really cleaning these sites up, not just capping, covering, and moving along.
And whose responsibility should it be to do that?
Well, if you can find the individual who caused the problem and they're still the property holder, you've got an easy solution.
Yeah, but that's probably not going to be the case in most of the cases.
What they did, coming out of Love Canal actually, the whole struggle around Love Canal, the US government set up a system called the Superfund. And they put on, I love the name of this, a tax on certain chemicals. So if you were producing a chemical that could be finding its way into one of these sites, you paid a tax, and it created this big fund. And that fund was around for these orphaned sites where you didn't have the culprit at hand to make them pay the cleanup.
We don't have that here, though.
We do not have anything.
Should we have a Superfund here, Dave?
I think it's important when we look at brownfield sites to develop both private and public partnerships. I think both are instrumental in turning these sites back into productive use.
Translation?
both the private investment sector has to come to the table, and we have to provide the right framework from the public point of view, whether it's incentives that municipalities can provide, or grants, or other loans and funding that would be available to developers to make these things happen, and make sure the right programs are being placed on the site for the contaminants of concern.
Do you think developers would be prepared to pay, if you're a major chemical company, and do you think you'd be prepared to pay into a fund that would go to cleaning up all these sites all over the province?
I believe it really needs to lie more with the future land use of the site as opposed to what was done previous. But they are a party to addressing those issues. There's no question if they still exist today.
Now, you know, people who hear that are going to go a little nuts on you, right? I mean, you sound like you're letting the people who are responsible for making the mess in the first place off the hook.
Well, I guess many of the brownfield sites that we're looking at or discussing, there really isn't a responsible party left today. Okay, and most of the companies that have brownfield sites, they are very responsible in addressing those issues, and those aren't the ones that we're talking about today.
Okay, let's talk about citizen participation, because we saw obviously in the case of Orillia, there is a citizens group that does not feel it has had a proper role. We saw them try to come to a meeting. They were prevented from going to the public meeting in the case. How important is it that the public get its say?
It's very important. You have to bring all stakeholders into the fold in a brownfield site development. Whether it's perceived or real, you have to address those concerns, and it's fundamental to the success of the project.
How much public input is enough, Gord?
We'll have enough public input when we've created a mechanism to clean up all these sites.
Okay, but we're not going to have a super fund tomorrow. So in the absence of that,
then the public is going to the public is going to have to keep putting in its demands. And frankly, if you look at where we are now, the few things we do have in place, right? The fact that there is a better test if it's for a public housing development. The fact that there's any kind of significant amount of money around in any jurisdiction in North America for paying for cleanup. The fact that we have soil testing required. Each and every one of these you can trace back to a specific fight where a community was told, oh, there's no problem here.
I appreciate
that. And they
that.
didn't accept it, and they went and kept pushing.
I really do appreciate that. However, I think you'll acknowledge that there also exists those who don't want any development anywhere for any reason. They will say no to anything. Should they be listened to ad infinitum?
Well, I've got to tell you, in 20 years of doing this kind of work, I don't run into very many people like that. I do run into an awful lot of plain, common, ordinary folk, just like yourself, just like me, who take a look at this and say, hey, wait a minute. If there was vinyl chlorine monomer here and there was asbestos here and they're saying it's all gone and we're safe, it doesn't add up. It doesn't take a degree to know that. It doesn't take a tenure with the Ministry of Environment to know that. It doesn't take being a civil servant to know that. Plain common sense leads us to an awful lot of the improvements we've had, and a big dose of common sense is needed if we're going to clean up the other 50,000 or so sites we have.
You want a common sense revolution in a way, don't you?
Real public common participation.
Okay. There are two initials that environmentalists love, and I think developers get very snaky about, and those initials are EA, environmental assessment. What would be wrong with doing an environmental assessment in each of these cases?
Generally speaking, we don't really get involved necessarily with the Environmental Assessment Act on brownfield sites today. What we see is the Environmental Protection Act and the brownfield regulations being used on most brownfield sites. In this particular example of the case study that we've seen tonight, there is the potential for the EA process to be evaluated.
Which is long and expensive.
Right, which is long and expensive. So there's got to be, in my opinion, a better solution to satisfy the stakeholders than going through the EA process.
Is there a better solution, Gord?
Well, if we had a mechanism in place to pay, it was interesting listening to the mayor of Orillia go on tonight. Several times he said, you know, we've done everything we can do that we can afford. We're committed to doing everything we need to do if we can afford it.
Well, that's a factor, though, wouldn't you acknowledge that?
Absolutely. It's completely a factor. And what this comes down to is, are we willing to trade protection of the environment and protection of human health for some money? And the environmental assessment process, yes, it also costs money. In each and every one of these cases, the public is being asked to accept a diminished level of protection and safety, a diminished level of participation, because it costs too much to protect you and to give you fair hearing. That's not acceptable in my view.
Is it acceptable in your view?
Well, I think there's better ways to get stakeholder involvement than the Environmental Assessment Act.
When you say
the planning
better,
process.
You mean shorter and cheaper?
Well, I just mean better involvement, better engagement of the community. I think it's important that those are a really fundamental piece of the brownfield site development. It should be involved in the planning process and community improvement plans for the area, and it should be continued throughout the course of the remediation site development.
Can you give me a for instance? We know that the other side, for example, likes the environmental assessment process. It may be lengthy, it may be expensive, but you get some very clear information at the end of the day. What's your alternative?
Well, I think I agree with the principles of the Environmental Assessment Act. I think if there was a way that we can take the spirit of the Environmental Assessment Act and apply it to the brownfield site development, that would be a better way to address those issues.
Okay. In our last minute and change here, Gordon, I want to ask you, at the end of the day, do environmentalists have to put a little water in their wine? Or these lands are going to sit here forever and never be developed because no developer is going to take the risk of, lawsuits as far as the eye can see if these things eventually get off the ground? What's your opinion?
Well, you know us, Steve. We always want our cake and eat it too.
Yes, I do.
The problem is here that the one constituency that's being asked to give something away most is the public. The chemical industry, whose substances these are, they don't want to pay. The developers, well, they want some real limits on what it is they're going to have to pay. Municipalities, their budgets are all tight.
But it's
Province
the public
doesn't want to raise taxes.
The public are also the chief beneficiaries of this thing if it ever gets done.
Well, yes and no. I don't get a return on investment from the Dow Chemical Corporation's profits every year, nor do I get a return on investment on Ellis Dawn and other property developers and subcontractors. So
but your kids might play baseball at these sites and go swimming, play tennis.
Yeah. So if we want to keep all the profits in public hands, if we want to keep all of the control of the lands in public hands and all the decision making in public hands, sure, let's make it a public site and we'll pay for it publicly. But if we want control and profits to go to a private benefactor, that private benefactor has to be willing to accept liability. And the problem with these sites is the great liability shuffle. No one wants to pay.
Is there any set of circumstances, 30 seconds, that you can see where developers would accept liability?
Developers are willing to take the risk provided they understand the risks that they're getting involved with, and that there's ways to manage and to limit those risks. And the recent legislation in Ontario is providing some relief to those points. Is it far enough? Probably not, but at least it's a step forward, and people are committed to redevelop these sites, and we'd like to think as time goes on it'll improve.
Dave Harper, Gord Perks, good of you both to come in tonight and share your views on this subject. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thursday on Studio 2, Jane Bennett, Canada's First Lady of the Saxophone.